Since time immemorial, the Anishinaabe people of Saugeen First Nation and the Chippewas of Nawash unceded First Nation, together known as the Saugeen Ojibwe Nation, have lived in relationship with the waters, lands, and beings of the Laurentian Great Lakes. This continues today as the Saugeen Ojibwe Nation stewards the largest First Nation fishery on the Great Lakes and continue to exercise their rights and responsibilities within their territory. The Great Lakes fishery is vital for the Saugeen Ojibwe Nation, also known as the San, for cultural, commercial, and ecological reasons. However, the health of the Great Lakes and its fish populations are under threat from many factors, including climate change and invasive species. One example of an invasive species in the Great Lakes is sea lamprey. Sea lamprey are a parasitic fish that were introduced to the Great Lakes in the early 1900s. Once established, sea lamprey played a major role in the decimation of the Great Lakes fisheries in the 1940s and 1950s. Control methods were put in place to reduce sea lamprey populations. One example of a control method is Dennys Dam on the Saugeen River within San territory. Dennys Dam was rebuilt in the 1970s as a sea lamprey barrier which prevents sea lamprey from traveling upstream to spawn. By 2000, Dennys Dam was in a state of disrepair and needed to be rehabilitated. The Ontario Ministry of Natural Resources and others got together to plan this rehabilitation, but the San were not invited to these discussions. Because the San were not properly consulted and their rights not respected, the project was put on hold indefinitely. However, in 2015, the San and the Great Lakes Fishery Commission started to build a relationship and worked together to rehabilitate Dennys Dam in a way that respected San's rights, knowledge, and decision-making power, which led to the dam being reconstructed in 2018. This rehabilitation of Dennys Dam serves as an example of how Indigenous and non-Indigenous groups can partner together to implement sea lamprey stewardship. Because of this, we wanted to research this example and learn more about the factors that made it successful. To do this, a research partnership was formed between Charity Nunkus and Dr. Nathan Young from the University of Ottawa and Ryan Lauzon, who is a fish biologist for Chippewas of Nawash unceded First Nation. A research agreement was made together, and following the principles laid out in this agreement, 14 interviews were conducted with people who were part of the Dennys Dam rehabilitation. This included people from San, the Great Lakes Fishery Commission, Department of Fisheries and Oceans Canada, and others. These interviews resulted in the identification of 3 major themes. The first theme is knowledge coexistence. Knowledge coexistence is an approach of bridging or using Western science and Indigenous knowledge to contribute in parallel to produce a mutual understanding from which decisions are made. Knowledge coexistence was used in the studies that were conducted for the rehabilitation project. These studies bridge both Indigenous knowledge and Western science to develop insights from which decisions about the Dennys Dam construction were made between the San and the Great Lakes Fishery Commission. The second theme is relationship-building factors that existed in the Dennys Dam rehabilitation, which helped to build a robust partnership. There are 4 main factors. 1. Going beyond duty to consult obligations to form a meaningful partnership. 2. Engaging early in the planning process so that San input was a part of the process from the very beginning. 3. Providing equitable funding and capacity to make sure that all parties had the tools needed to get the work done in a good way. 4. Establishing meaningful communication throughout the project to make sure there was collaboration and agreement on what the problem was they were trying to solve. As well, community meetings took place to build relationships and to hear about the community's concerns and questions. The last major theme from the study was the legacy and impact of the Dennys Dam rehabilitation. For many of the non-Indigenous organizations involved in the project, the Dennys Dam rehabilitation was really positive and taught them how to build strong relationships with Indigenous communities and how to incorporate knowledge coexistence into other sea lamprey stewardship projects. Similarly, many of the San representatives interviewed saw the rehabilitation as a positive relationship and a way for Indigenous and non-Indigenous groups to work together on a project. However, a San community member raised concerns that after the rehabilitation, fish now gather in different areas of the Saugeen River. A key goal of the Dennys Dam rehabilitation was not to impact where fish gather in the river, especially in the area right below the dam. However, it appears it did. More should have been done to protect this area, and there should have been more follow-up with community members to understand the impacts of the rehabilitation. In conclusion, the Dennys Dam rehabilitation is an example of how to build knowledge coexistence into a project amongst Indigenous and non-Indigenous parties. That could look like conducting Indigenous knowledge studies and Western scientific studies and bringing these sources of information together, not to justify another, but to hold both in parallel and use them to make decisions together. As well, Dennys Dam shows how important it is to go beyond duty to consult obligations, engage early, provide funding and capacity, and establish meaningful communication. The Dennys Dam rehabilitation is significant because Indigenous nations are often not in decision-making positions in sea lamprey stewardship, even though their experience and knowledge would allow for more learning and more informed decisions. As well, Indigenous nations have inherent rights to make decisions within their territories and should be included in these decisions. Especially with climate change and other threats the Great Lakes face, it means the old way of doing things may no longer be acceptable, and we need to work together on solutions. Dennys Dam shows the need and opportunity of knowledge coexistence and relationship building in sea lamprey stewardship, and more generally, the need for more wisdom and understanding of the Great Lakes and the species in them to make stewardship decisions.